We have an opportunity to change the world, each and every one of us. And we can do that by the way we show up as leaders. So I have a question for you. How much of your leadership style is dictated by your personal style? Any guesses? 100%. 100%. We all are human beings, not human doings. How we show up in our personal life, how we're being as a leader, drives how we are as a leader in our leadership style. So I've had an amazing career. I've had a chance to work with executives and leaders all over the world for the last 20 years. And the one thing I've noticed in working with all of them, they all have one thing in common. They're all human beings. So I've had an amazing career. I've had a chance to work with executives and leaders over the last 20 years all over the planet, in the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector, academia, government. And the one thing that they all have in common, last time I checked, they're human beings. So we have a choice as leaders. We can either choose to respond from our prefrontal cortex, the human brain, or we can choose to react from our amygdala, the reptilian brain. And we have a choice moment by moment in our lives, second by second, every single human interaction that we have with our staff members, with our colleagues, with our board, with our stakeholders, we get to choose. What do you want to do? How do you want people to feel when they're engaged with you? How do you want them to experience you as a leader? Do you want to react, or do you want to respond in a more contemplative? How are you spending your money? We all think about how are we spending our money. We spend all of our time, at least our waking hours, at work. And we're working because we're worried about money. The question I have for you is, how are you spending your life? Each of you, as leaders of your organization, you have an agreement, whether you know it or not, with your board of directors. They're paying you a hell of a lot of money to give up your soul. Your life is not yours. You're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're at the beck and call of your board of directors, of the people who work for you, your customers. You don't have a life. You know that. We all know that. Whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you have it in writing or not, it's not your life. You've given up your life. And what have you given it up for? For money. So, do you own your money, or does your money own you? Each of us spend most of our waking hours working for money. And what are we going to do with it? Do you want your life, or do you want your money? What value do you place on money? And is it appropriate? Does it work for you? Is your money working for you, or are you working for your money? You all know that our lives are chaotic and complicated. All of the systems that were created in the last 50 or 60 years have outlived their existence. We need to replace them. Our banking systems, our healthcare systems, our government, they're all out of date. We get that. The simple problems have been solved. We're now in a place where we're dealing with really complicated, really complex situations. You as leaders, your job is to figure it out. Your job is to help provide context for your people, to give them a storyline, to give them a map of where we're going, why we're going there. And the only way you can get there is through being a conscious leader. You as leaders can do it. That's what you've been hired to do. That's what you're engaged to do. All of us as citizens of the world, we're all leaders. We can let go of those old notions of the hierarchy, the patriarchal structure. We're all being called to be leaders. We all have that opportunity. It's an amazing time in human history when we can each step up and lead what needs to get done. And there's one really simple answer. It's conscious leadership. We all have this mental model of what work is and where we work. And the reality is, it's actually a really new experience on this planet. People in the US 120 years ago, 95% of Americans were working on the family farm. There was only 5% of the US population that was working in what we think of as the work. In a retail shop, if there was a bank in the town, if there was a school in a town, a library, people weren't working in the way that we think about work. It's actually something that's a very contemporary concept, that we're working and we think of work as sitting behind a desk, sitting at a keyboard, doing whatever we do in terms of interacting with customers. That's a new concept. That's a whole new reality of work. And when we think back to the last century and the transformation that happened over that 100 years, it was profound for each of us as human beings, as leaders and as individual employees, to make a conscious choice about our lives, about how we spend our time at work, how we interact with each other, our colleagues, our bosses, the people who work for us. We have a choice, and it's time to wake up. It's time to be more conscious. It's time to make better decisions, wiser decisions for yourself, for your family, for your employer, and for our planet. So we have a choice as employees, as human beings, to make a decision that serves us, that serves our family, that serves the people we work with, that serves our employer, that serves our community. We can choose. Each of us wake up in the morning, and before we've gotten out of bed, we're already starting to unpack parts of ourselves. Which things can't I take to work? Which parts of me aren't appropriate? Which parts of me, my stories, my beliefs, my convictions, the things that matter to me. By the time we finish brushing our teeth, taking a shower, getting dressed, walking out the door, we've left parts of ourselves behind. 40, 50, 60% of us doesn't even show up in the workplace. And you know what? All of our colleagues, they've left 40, 50, 60% of themselves behind as well. So we've got a shell of ourselves interacting with a shell of all of our colleagues. It's no wonder our workplaces are dysfunctional. You have a choice. You have an opportunity to be consciously deciding which parts of you don't you bring to work. Which parts of you do you leave behind? Which parts aren't appropriate? And which parts are? But make a conscious choice. So as a leader, you have power. You've got organizational power. You have power to influence Wall Street. You have power to influence all of the people who work for you. You have power to influence your vendors, your suppliers, your customers, your employees, and I lost my thought.
I'm sorry, I won't do that to you again.
That's okay.
No, that was good. And just stay with it. It's right.
Is there enough there, Peter, that I can just pick it up? Or
Absolutely. I think you can pick it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the answer was great.
So how do you want to wield that power? What do you want to do with the power that you have? I've talked to leaders all over the world, and I hear the same thing. You really want to do the right thing, but you're worried about your boss, your board, replacing you if you don't hit the quarterly numbers. You're worried about being kicked out, losing your job, and the question I would ask you is that really true? You can choose to show up as you know you need to be, exercising the power and the influence that you have to do the right thing, and take what you perceive as risk and do what needs to be done. You can have an impact in society. You can have an impact on your workplace culture. You can have an impact on the leaders that work for you. You can have an impact on your board. You can choose to do the right thing, take what you perceive to be as risk. I would just ask yourself, are you telling yourself a story, or are you telling yourself what's real? And I suspect that if you are truly honest with yourself, if you really examine what you believe and why you believe it, it's probably a story that's not serving you, It's not serving your board. It's not serving your shareholders. It's not serving your employees. It's not serving your suppliers. And most importantly, it's not serving society. What is the story that you're telling? And is that story serving you? What do you truly believe? And most importantly, why do you believe it? Because you've got a story running in your head that's telling you, justifying why you're doing what you're doing. And I would just ask you, is that story serving you? Is it serving your employees? Is it serving your customers? Is it serving the other stakeholders? And is it serving the community at large? As a leader, you have a choice. And I would encourage each of you, in a very conscious manner, in a very conscious way, to ask, what do I believe? And why do I believe it? Each of us as leaders have an opportunity to be a systems thinker, to understand both the intended and hopefully the unintended consequences of our actions, knowing that we're dealing with a very complex world, but do it in a way that it's not complicated. Don't over-engineer the systems. Don't over-engineer what you're trying to do. Think about each of the stakeholders. Think about what matters to them. Think about what they care about. Think about what's important to your organization, to your employees, to your customers, to your vendors, your suppliers. Think about the communities that you operate in. Think about what matters to the places where your employees live. You've got a responsibility and you have an opportunity as a leader. Being simple doesn't mean that you're simplistic, but you don't have to over-engineer. You don't have to make things complicated. Yes, it is a complex world. Yes, all of the systems that we created as human beings over the last 50 or 60 years are falling apart. They can't support a multi-generational, a multi-racial, multi-ethnic workforce. Those systems need to be replaced. And it's not easy. I get it. But it's what needs to get done. And as a leader, that's the opportunity and the challenge that each of us has, is to figure out how do we replace the systems that are there? How do we replace them in a way that's human, that's humane, that serves all of our stakeholders? How do we do it in a way and in a time frame that actually supports what each of us need as we move through change? People move through change in different ways. Each of us hear information in different ways. Each of us like to be communicated with in a different way. Some of us would prefer to see things in writing. Some of us are happy to see a PowerPoint. Others, it's a series of conversations. You as a leader need to understand your audience. You need to understand how they like to receive information, the time frame that they need to process it. That is complicated. But in doing it in that way makes it feel simple to the receivers. It makes it possible for them to receive the information, and it helps them move through the complexity of where you're trying to take them. But it provides an opportunity for them to really appreciate that you care, that what matters to them is being heard, being listened to, being understood. As a leader, as someone who has organizational power and authority, you have an amazing responsibility and a tremendous opportunity to have an impact in the world. Each of us have an opportunity as leaders to make an impact in society, on the planet, or we, like so many of the species we have eradicated, will become extinct as well. And how do we get there? What is the one thing that we can do to make that possible, that we as species are going to survive? The answer is really simple and really hard. It requires each of us to become a conscious leader, to become awake, aware of who we are, how we're showing up, how our actions are impacting and influencing the people around us, owning our actions, owning our behaviors, owning who we are. It's as simple as that and as hard as that. To make a decision, a conscious choice about when we wake up, who we're going to be every single day. Being intentional about who we are, being intentional about how we want to show up, being intentional about the actions that we take and the choices that we make. We are the directors of that story. We're the creators, and we get to choose where we put our attention. We get to choose where we're living our life from, and we have the opportunity to constantly notice what's going on in this thing we call our body, what's going on in this thing we call our brain. What are the stories we're telling ourselves, and where am I living my life from? It's a choice. We, as human beings, have a consciousness. We have the ability to use our conscious brain to help us respond to what's happening around us. And with that consciousness, we're constantly cycling throughout our day through what I call the four states of consciousness. So the first state of consciousness is this place of, I'm in victim mode. I'm a victim of the life around me. I'm a victim. I have no agency over my life. The world is doing something to me. I don't have a choice. And when we're in that place, we're in the drama triangle. I'm a victim. Somebody else is the villain that's doing something to me. And I'm constantly looking for a hero, somebody to come in and save the day. But I have no agency over my life. The second state of consciousness is a state that I call the shadow side of ego. We all have an ego. It's what keeps us safe in the world. It's necessary. It's part of what it means to be human. But with the shadow side of ego, it's what we think about when we hear people talking about the ego, the egomaniac, the big ego, the whatever. So the shadow side of ego says, my life is fantastic because damn it, I made it that way. I picked the right parents. I grew up in the right community. I went to the right schools. I got the right grades. I got the right job. I got that promotion. I made all of this money. It was me, me, me. I made that happen. That state of consciousness, it's different than the first about being a victim of our life. But there's this false notion that I'm in control. I'm in charge. My life is fantastic because I made it that way. The third state of consciousness is this place that we all have experienced at some point in our life. It's this state of ease, of flow, that sense of I'm in the synchronicity of life, where you don't have to effort. It's really simple. It's joyful. It's fun. It's an amazing place to live from. The fourth state of consciousness is this sense of there's only one. There's no separation between me and you and you and you and you and you and all of the people on the planet and Mother Nature and the universe. We're all one. We're all connected. We're all in this together. There's no separation between any of us. It's a delightful place. If we're lucky, we might get to visit that place once or twice in our lifetime. When I think about those four states of consciousness and how I live in those, the reality is that as a human being, we can't help it. We're constantly cycling through at least the first three stages, and especially the first two. But we have a choice. We can make a conscious decision about where do we want to live our lives from. We can develop habits and routines and behaviors over time. We can set an intention about where we want to live our life from. And we can notice from moment to moment to moment, where are we living our life from? We can ask the question, we can inquire. As we're in a conversation, as we're in a discussion, as we're driving down the road, as things are happening around us, we can constantly be vigilant and asking ourselves, where am I in this moment? Am I in this place of victimhood? Am I in this place of the shadow side of ego? Am I in this place of synchronicity and flow and joy and ease and purpose? Am I in this blissful state of oneness? And just that inquiry alone oftentimes will let us realize where we are and reorient to where we want to be, where we intend to be living our life from. And we can choose. As a leader, as someone who has organizational power and authority, you have an amazing responsibility and a tremendous opportunity to have an impact in the world. The answer is really simple and really hard. It requires each of us to become a conscious leader. We have a choice. We can make a conscious decision about where do we want to live our lives from, without putting ourselves in this victim place because I'm in the shadow side of my ego. Oh my God, I don't want to be there. Now we put ourselves down into victim mode because we're not where we want to be. But without judgment, without making ourselves wrong, we can choose where we want to be. And it's just a simple inquiry and intention and the power of intention about where we want to live our lives from. We are the narrators of our life. We are the directors of that story. We're the creators, and we get to choose where we put our attention. We get to choose where we're living our life from, and we have the opportunity to constantly notice what's going on in this thing we call our body, what's going on in this thing we call our brain. What are the stories we're telling ourselves? And where am I living my life from? It's a choice. And each of us can choose, each of us can decide, and each of us get to live our lives from those places. I'm guessing that each of you are wondering, how do you bring this into your life? And how do you bring it into your work life? And how do you bring it in as a leader for the people who work for you, for the organization culture, for the work environment? How do you do that? And it's not easy. I'm not going to pretend, I'm not going to suggest that in any way it's easy. But first, it requires a conscious choice. You have to take agency over your life. And then there's a whole series of practices that you can integrate into your daily life and bring those and bring you, that conscious you, into the workplace as a leader, as an employee. So there are any number of practices. For me, I've got at least a dozen practices I do every day as part of my daily life, my daily routine. When I get up in the morning, I have a series of practices. I have a series of things I do. But one of the first things I do is to set an intention for my day. How do I want my day to be? What am I intending? Not a goal, not a to-do list, not a list of things I'm going to do, but what is my intention on how I'm going to be, how I'm going to show up? How are other people going to experience me? It's a really simple, yet incredibly elegant thing to do. To say, this is how I intend to be today. Then I immediately will go to my morning practices of contemplation. For some folks, it's prayer. For some, it's a walk in nature. For some, it's meditation. But connecting with me, connecting with the universe, and being really clear about I'm in my body. I want to be in my body. I want to let go of all of this stuff that could get in the way of me having the day that I intended to be. Physical activity, physical practice is important. Some folks it's yoga, Pilates, maybe a run, maybe it's time in the weight room. But spending some time with you before you engage and you start your day and connecting to your body is a really important practice. For me, I love hiking. If I'm not out in nature every morning for at least 45 minutes in a hike, I'm not having the kind of day that I want to have. And as I'm getting ready to go to work, I'm consciously thinking and making choices about who I'm going to be that day. I'm consciously making choices about how I want to show up. I'm not just going through the routine of brushing my teeth, combing my hair, showering, dressing, having breakfast, and out the door, but I'm trying to be present. I'm trying to be immensely grateful that I woke up today, that I'm alive, that I get to experience the world and benefit from the joy of being alive and having that sense of gratitude. And when I'm doing my morning meditation, I have compassion for anybody I know, which is everybody, who's suffering. It's a human condition. It's unavoidable. It comes with the job of being alive. And also being very intentional about being centered, being grounded, being present, and going into my day, into my life, into my routine as the best possible me. And I bring that into the workplace. I bring that into the people I work with. And I can be a shining beacon of what's possible. And if they're vacillating through their moments throughout the day of the 4 states of consciousness, and I'm doing the same, I can at least stop myself. I can be present to where I am and ask that question. Where am I? Is this where I want to be? Without judgment, without making myself wrong, is this where I want to be showing up from? And then move to where I want to be, where I stated, I intended I wanted to be, and continue to demonstrate, to role model, to be there for people so they're experiencing me in the way I want them to, being very intentional about that. And if it's appropriate, and if they're open to it, then having a conversation to say, when you said that, when you did this, when I observed a particular action or behavior or got a text or an email note or a phone call from you, this was my experience. Was that what you intended? Without judgment, without making them wrong, but helping them be aware, because maybe they weren't aware, maybe they weren't conscious of how their action could impact others. And through that inquiry, through that process, once again, without judgment, without making them wrong, it's an invitation for a conversation about how they're showing up and helping them raise their awareness. And through those seemingly simple conversations, those simple actions with our colleagues, there's an opportunity to change the work culture. There's an opportunity to change the family dynamics at home. There's an opportunity to change the communities that they live and work in. So when I hit the bed at the end of the day and my head hits the pillow, I ask myself just a really simple question. Do I like how I showed up today? And if the answer is yes, I have to ask why. What did I do? How did I show up? How did I behave? How did I engage with other people? How did they respond to me that I could answer yes to, do I like how I showed up today? And if the answer is no, I have to go through that same inquiry. Why is it no? What didn't I do or what did I do that I can't say, yes, I enjoyed, I'm happy with how I showed up today? And through those seemingly simple conversations, those simple actions with our colleagues, there's an opportunity to change the work culture. There's an opportunity to change the family dynamics at home. There's an opportunity to change the communities that they live and work in. And if we find that unfortunately, there's not receptivity, there's not an openness, then we have to ask why. Is there something I'm not communicating in an effective way? But if we're certain, if we're confident that what we're saying is really resonating with the person and they're choosing not to change their behaviors, and the organization norm, culture doesn't shift or change, then we can continue to be a martyr and continue to work there, or we can go work someplace else. As leaders, each of us have a responsibility to recognize and have a mindset, a mental framework, a mental model, a paradigm that says, even though we're paying these people to come work for us, every single one of them is a volunteer. And they could choose to be a volunteer someplace else. And when we think about volunteers, there's a sense of gratitude, there's a sense of appreciation, there's a mindset that we treat people differently when they're volunteers versus when we're paying them. They don't owe us anything. And I think as a leader, if we can adopt a mindset that everybody is choosing, they're a volunteer, forget the money part. They're making a choice to show up. And if we can show them the same amount of gratitude, appreciation, compassion that we do for people who truly are volunteers that aren't being compensated, it will shift the organization culture. It will create the kind of workplace that we actually want to be in. So each of you have made a choice to be an entrepreneur. You've made a choice, a decision to found a company. And it's fantastic. It's exciting. It's overwhelming at times. It's really cool to, make an impact in the world, to certainly make an impact in your bank account. And it's a choice that you chose. And the reality is that you made a choice not just about starting a business, but you made a choice about your life. And with that choice, you will find that this will consume your life. And it will be your singular focus. You'll feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. And it's a choice that you made. And there's some amazing highs, and you've already experienced them. And there's some incredible lows, asking for money, realizing what your runway is and how much cash you have in the bank and how many more months you can keep the door open. You made assumptions in your business planning around how much capital you were going to need, what your operating expenses were going to be, and it didn't work out the way you had intended or planned, possibly. And it's possible that you needed to actually have twice as much money and twice as much time to get to where you needed to be. But regardless, you're living the life that you chose. And the reality is, we hear people talking all the time about work-life balance. And it's a false choice. There's only life. And life can be incredibly messy. And you have the opportunity, you have the choice that you need to make. And as a conscious leader, it's a choice to say, is this the life that I want to live? Is this really what I signed up for? Is this what I'm committed to? Is this what I believe in? Am I really committed to the decision I made to start this business? And if it is, it's accepting that 60, 70, 80, 100-hour weeks, the stress and everything else that comes with being an entrepreneur, the exhilaration, the excitement, all of the fun, the bragging rights, the impact on society, on your industry, on the employees, on the people who work there, that's all part of the choice you made. And I would encourage each of you to shift to a place of what I call conscious leadership, where you acknowledge and you recognize that that was a choice you made about how you wanted to live your life. Let go of this notion of work-life balance, because there's only life. And you will never, if you're trying to find a way to balance work and life, you won't find the equilibrium. You won't find the place where you were hoping that maybe you could be focused on your job, part of your life, you could have a personal life outside of work. This is a choice you made. This is a decision, and it's okay. And it's temporary. And things will evolve, and things will change. And as you move through the various stages of organization development, you'll have additional staffing. You'll have periods in your life where you will have time for vacation, where you will have your weekends back, where you'll have your evenings back, your mornings back. You won't be working, thinking all the time about work. It's temporal, and that's okay. But I would encourage you to make that conscious decision that this notion of work-life balance, it's a false choice, and it will only lead to your suffering. You're living the life that you chose. And the reality is, we hear people talking all the time about work-life balance. And it's a false choice. There's only life. And life can be incredibly messy. And you have the opportunity, you have the choice that you need to make. And as a conscious leader, it's a choice to say, is this the life that I want to live? CEO, as founder, yes, you will have, and you do have organizational power and authority, but that's not how you get stuff done. How you're going to get stuff done is through influence. So a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've worked with, I've coached over the years, oftentimes they're coming into the startup of their business with a mental model and a framework about what does it mean to be a CEO of their business. And they perceive that when they are starting their business, that they're going to be the CEO, they're going to be the founder, they're going to have all this organizational power and authority and control, and they're going to be in charge. And they're going to be able to drive through decisions, and they're going to be able to make things happen. And I just want to share with you, you will help yourself if you can let all of that go. Because as CEO, as founder, yes, you will have, and you do have organizational power and authority, but that's not how you get stuff done. How you're going to get stuff done is through influence. Yes, at times you will have to use your organizational power. Yes, you will have the ability in certain circumstances to cash in some of those chips, but I would encourage you to keep those in reserve for when you really need them, and use that power when it can have the most impact and effect. And use your influence. And the way you can be most influential is through the process of being a conscious leader. You're intentional about your actions, you're intentional about your behaviors, you're intentional about how you're showing up, and you're influencing people by taking the time to listen to what matters to them, to have a headset, a mindset that these folks are volunteers. Yes, you're paying them either in equity or cash or some combination, but they're choosing, and they choose every single morning when they wake up, to show up for work or not, to show up as their best selves or not, to be productive or not. And you have the ability to influence and shape how they show up by being an example, by being self-aware of how you're showing up, and being an example, and being really crystal clear about the organization culture that you want to have, and to deal with the behaviors that are inconsistent with the culture that you're trying to create. And use your ability to influence. Yes, as I said, use your organizational power when necessary, but keep it in reserve. And recognize and work on your influence and your influencing mapping, and in being very intentional about the relationships you have, the amount of interaction you have with the people on your team, on your staff, the customers, suppliers, and others, stakeholders in your organization, looking at the whole ecosystem and trying to influence and drive and shape it in the way that you want it to go. So how do you be an effective leader? Certainly using your power wisely, certainly using your influence skills appropriately. Listening is a critical component of being an effective leader. Paying attention, knowing what matters to your people, having that headset, that mindset that they're volunteers and they're choosing to show up or not. Those are all critical pieces, essential pieces of being a leader. So what's another piece of being a conscious leader? An essential piece of being a conscious leader is around safety and trust. And you have a responsibility as a leader to create a safe working environment for your people, for everyone that you interact with, to create a sense of safety. And it's only once they have a felt sense, they experience in their bodies that they feel safe, will you enable a trusting relationship? And it goes both ways. You have to create that safe container and then see how they show up and see if you have a level of trust with the people who are working for and around you. But it's an essential piece, and you as a leader are responsible for creating that sense of safety, not only in one-on-one interactions with folks, but in the workplace. And in doing that, you enable a trusting environment, and with that trust, anything is possible. Anything's achievable. Hitting numbers, exceeding numbers, hitting your organization mission and vision is absolutely possible and doable with that safety and with trust. So when we look at the state of the world today, all of our systems were created 50 or 60 years ago. And those systems are collapsing. Our banking system, our healthcare system, our government, you name it, our environment, all of the systems are collapsing because they were designed at a time when we were a different world. They were designed at a time when we were a different people. They were designed at a time when organizations were different. The nature of the workplace was different. Everything we did was different. And they did. We all are influenced and shaped by, and what we believe is a result of the systems that we live in, that we work in, that we live our lives in every day. And those systems have us thinking and believing and seeing the world in a certain way. And all of those systems were designed and built for a time in our society when we were a different country, a different world. And it's time for us to hospice out those old systems and to midwife in the new systems that will support the world of today and the world of the future. And we have a wonderful opportunity to create those new systems that are representative of the diversity of the world, that aren't based on a certain mindset, a certain kind of leadership, a certain kind of organization. We have an opportunity to see the world as it is, not as the way we would like to see it. We have an opportunity to see the world in a way that it needs to be. Because we've got 7.5 billion people on the planet. It's growing to 11.5 billion or so in the next couple of decades. And if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to keep getting the same result, which is a result that doesn't support any of us. Got 7.5 billion people on the planet. It's growing to 11.5 billion or so in the next couple of decades. And if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to keep getting the same result, which is a result that doesn't support any of us. And it creates a life and a quality of life that none of us want. What were your first thoughts? What was going through your head? What were you thinking about? I suspect that you were thinking about, oh yeah, it's a work day. I've got to go to work. Thinking about, who am I going to be today? And as we're going through that thought process, we're thinking, which parts of me can't I take to work? Which parts of me do I have to remove? Which parts of me do I have to leave behind? Which parts of me is it not safe to bring to the workplace? So is it a surprise that we've got dysfunctional workplaces? Is it surprising that when we leave at the end of the day, we're exhausted? Is it surprising that we don't feel engaged? Is it surprising that we're thinking about a new job? Maybe it's not the job. Maybe it's not our employer. Do I have to leave parts of me behind? What would happen if I showed up as my whole self? And you set that intention. Who do I want to be when I wake up in the morning? Who do I want to be when I go to work? How do I want to be showing up in the workplace? How do I want to be showing up in the world? And recognize we're all human beings, not human doing. So how am I being? How are other people experiencing me? how am I experiencing them? And when I'm experiencing them, is that just a story I've made up about them because of bad past encounters with them or good past encounters with them? Or is that really them? And organizations who foster that kind of environment, that kind of communication, what we find is they actually have better results. They make more money. They have a higher retention rate of their workforce. People feel more engaged, more productive, more valued, and they have a bigger contribution to the communities they work in. It's amazing, and yet it's so profoundly simple. And it starts with each of us setting that intention before we go to bed at night. Who do I want to be tomorrow? Waking up in the morning and making that conscious decision. I'm going to take my whole self to work. Thank you all for being here. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. And I'm going to start by revealing a dirty secret that you all know, whether you've thought about it or not, whether you're conscious of it or not, and that each of you has a bargain, a contract with your board of directors, with your shareholders, which is you have given up your life for money. As a CEO, we all know it, we all get it. You're getting the big paycheck, and in exchange for that, you've given up your weekends, you've given up your evenings, you've given up your family life, you've given up everything that you thought was important, that mattered to you most, and frankly, it is what matters to you most. You've given up your life, and you're beholden to that paycheck. And it sucks. But you've been walking through your life with the aspiration of becoming a CEO. You finally get there. You think you have all of this organizational power. And the reality is your power is limited. And you have to really think about, how am I going to use that power? And you have to be judicious about it. And you have to really use your influence. And that's really where you get organizational power, is through your influence, not the authority that you have. But you have to fundamentally accept that without knowing it, I blindly walked into this role as a CEO for that paycheck. I had all kinds of thoughts, all kinds of ideas about what I was getting, and I didn't think about what I was giving up. And I would encourage each of you to really reflect on, what have you given up? It's not just your weekends, it's not just your evenings. How much of your soul have you given up? And what's that price? And how do you change it? Most importantly, how do you change it? What are you willing to do? What kinds of conversations are you willing to have with your boards of directors? What kinds of conversations are you willing to have with your leadership team? Because you're templating for them the kind of behavior that you want and expect from them. You've created an organizational culture and environment that you own. You've created this thing and the people who work for you. And are you getting what you wanted? Is the organization getting what it wants? Are the employees who are showing up, are they living the life that they want to live? You have a responsibility as a leader to be conscious, to wake up, to be aware of the life you're living, and to say, is this right? Is this what the world needs? Is this what I need? Is this what my family needs? Is this what the society that I live in, the community I live and work in, is this what they need? I suspect not. We know not. We know that there is a better way. You can look in the mirror. You can see your life, the life that you're living. And I would be very surprised that you're happy with it. In all of the CEO coaching work I've been doing for over the last 10 plus years, what I hear over and over and over and over and over again from every one of the clients I've worked with is how lonely they are. They've got stuff that they can't bring to their board of directors because their board is going to say, we got to get rid of this guy or this woman. They're not competent. They can't bring it to their subordinates because they all want their job. They can't bring it home to their partner because the last thing their partner wants to hear is more shit about what's going on in the workplace. So where do you go? What's your outlet? What do you do with this emotion, these thoughts, these ideas? What's happening for you? You stuff it down and you ask for another pay raise. You ask for more stock options. You ask for more stock because you're miserable. It's not worth it. So it's part of the reason why I've been coaching for so many years is to be that vehicle, that outlet, that relief valve for the CEOs that I'm working with, is to have a confidential, trusting, safe environment to talk about what really matters to them. And I would encourage each of you to find that outlet, to find somebody or some bodies, perhaps it's a group of colleagues, to get together on a regular basis to release that pressure, to allow yourself to have clarity of thought, to really honestly process what's going on inside. Because if you don't, then you're reflecting back to your subordinates, you're reflecting back to your board, you're reflecting back to the people who work for you a behavior that's not healthy. And it's not helpful. And it will drag down the organization over time. And it will destroy your health over time. And it's really simple. It's developing personal, human interaction, connection with somebody or some bodies where it's safe. And in doing so, and having that sense of safety, you develop a sense of trust. And with that sense of trust, then it's safe for other people. And all of a sudden your subordinates feel like it's okay to come to you and tell you the information that they've been reluctant to tell you. So when we're in that moment, when we're trying to make a decision about am I going to react or am I going to respond to this situation, their body is picking that up. And as a result, our body is picking that up. And there's this whole exchange that's happening before any words are being shared, before any actions are being taken. And as that additional information is coming into our body, we're storytellers. As human beings, that's what we do. We're narrating the story of our life. So in that moment, our brain is in overdrive, writing this whole story about what's going to happen. And usually that story that's being written is reinforcing, I need to go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. I need to react. My amygdala is telling me, my reptilian brain is telling me, be afraid, be very afraid. And their body is picking up on that. And their amygdala, their reptilian brain is telling them, be afraid, be very afraid. And then our body's picking up what their body's sending us. And it just gets escalated. And no words have been spoken. Their body, and we have a choice. So I'd love to invite a couple of you up to do an exercise. Anybody want to raise their hand and just step up here? And we're going to do an exercise where you get a chance to experience what this is like, what I'm talking about, without any words being exchanged. So come on up. Thank you. I appreciate you volunteering. For subject B, I want you to just notice what you notice. Notice what's happening in your body, any sensations, any thoughts, anything that's happening physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, whatever. Subject A, thank you. I want you to be thinking about something in your life. Any story, it doesn't matter what it is. Could be something joyful and fun, it could be something really painful. But as you're thinking about it, I want you to be looking at subject B and let them experience what's happening for you. And as we do it, I want you to both be thinking about it, reliving that experience if you can. So thank you both for stepping in. Really appreciate you willing to play with us. Appreciate it. So I would ask you to play the role of the employee. And as you're playing the role of the employee, I would like for you to just notice what's going on inside your body. Any thoughts that are coming up, any emotions that are coming up, how your physical body is feeling. And I would like you to be the leader. And this individual is the employee. And I want you to just be thinking about him as an employee, not as an ambassador for the organization. And as you're thinking about that, I want you to notice what's going on in your body. What thoughts are coming up, what emotions are arising, any physical sensations you're having as you're going through this exercise. So I would just ask you both to look at each other, you as the leader, you as the employee, without saying any words, and just feel this experience. It's an emerging science that has come out in the last decade or so. It's called biomimicry. It's learning from nature. As humans, we've always learned from nature, whether we were paying attention or not. But there's a whole science that's influencing the way we think about design, the way we think about systems, the way we think about organizations. And some of the research that was done in the last decade was understanding that there's this mushroom that grows in the earth, in forests. It's called mycelium. And it's like the internet of trees. Trees talk to each other. They use the mycelium to communicate, to share information. When we walk into a forest, there's a signal that's being sent out. When somebody comes in with a chainsaw and starts cutting down the trees, there's a signal that gets sent out, and the trees talk to each other, letting each other know there's danger. And we have an opportunity as leaders to look at nature, to learn from nature, to realize there's a whole lot going on there that we didn't realize. And we can use biomimicry to bring that back into how we think about our organizations, how to work together, how networks work. Nature is an amazing teacher for us. So I would ask you, what is the one thing that you can do differently in your life to have an impact in the workplace that enables you to make a difference in the world? So I've got a question for you. How much of a leader's style is influenced by their personal style? Any guesses? It's 100%. What's the one thing that you can do in the workplace and how you show up, how you're being, that can have an impact and ripple out into the world? So why do we have so many startups in the world today? Why are there so many organizations that have been created in the last couple of decades? There are a number of explanations for it. One certainly is, and the most important, is that the barriers to entry to starting a company have fallen. Whether we're talking about the internet, access to capital through the various means, credit cards, PayPal, sorry.
It's okay, you're doing great.
Venmo.
Oh, online resources.
Yeah.
So when we think about starting a company today, and we think about what's necessary to start a business, so many of the barriers to entry have fallen. It's easy enough now through Google Suites to have the IT infrastructure that you need for communicating and sharing information. Through PayPal, through crowdfunding, through friends and family rounds of funding, credit cards, you have access to financial capital to start your business. The internet has given us the opportunity to get lots of information on competitors and the marketplace and what's happening. So the historic hard things about starting a business have become much easier. But with that in mind, why do so many startups fail? It's not because they don't have a good strategy. It's not that they don't have access to talent. It's not that they don't have access to capital. It's not that they don't have what they need in terms of the resources that are necessary. The piece that's oftentimes missing, particularly in the leadership of the organization, is the softer skills. the human interaction, the understanding of what is necessary to engage and drive human behavior, to get people excited about being an ambassador for the organization, for wanting to be a cheerleader for what you're doing, to show up as their highest and best self. That soft stuff is the hardest stuff of being a leader. The historic hard stuff of having the resources has actually become really easy. The barriers to entry have fallen. But I encourage every single leader I work with to work on their soft skills: communication, human interaction, intention, how they're showing up, self-awareness, being an effective and conscious leader. That's foundational in the world today. If you're going to have a successful business, if you're going to be a successful leader, you have to be present to the people who are working with and around you. You have to show up in as your highest and best self. And it's only by being present, conscious as a leader, will people want to follow you. Will they want to volunteer? Will they want to go beyond what's expected and what's required of them to get stuff done? So if we look over the last 120 years at the private sector, meaning for-profit, non-profit, or not for-profit, publicly traded, privately held companies, most of the organizations that were founded and traded on the New York Stock Exchange in 1900 don't exist anymore. Yet we still have this mental model about companies, and we see them as monoliths. We see them as an entity separate and distinct from ourselves. We see them as this bastion of power, this organism that controls an industry, that controls a sector of the economy, that might employ hundreds of thousands of people, that has a tremendous market share in whatever it is they're producing, that has a whole supply chain that affects hundreds of thousands of people in the workforce. And yet we completely separate that entity, that monolith, from the reality. And the reality is that entity is nothing more than a collection of the people who show up every day to do their jobs. And it's until we can separate out that old thinking, that sense of that's a monolith, there's this entity that is the corporation, and recognize it's just a collection of people. And those people show up, they create the organization culture. Those people show up and do their jobs. Those people show up and make decisions, sometimes bad decisions because they're motivated by a pay increase because they've got a kid going off to college, or they've got health expenses, or they've got other things, and they lose sight of what really matters. They lose sight of their moral compass, and they make choices, they make decisions around organization policy, around what the organization chooses to do, and then the whole inertia and power of that organization will get behind that decision and result in an impact on society that's not healthy, that's not good for anybody, including the organization itself and the people who work there. And we can point to lots of examples over the previous 100 years where an organization has created environmental degradation, has cost people their lives, has resulted in economic downturn, has destroyed cities, communities. And there's no entity that made that decision. Those decisions were made by individual people. They made choices. And there wasn't the governance in place necessarily. There weren't the structure, the policies, the procedures, the processes in place to help guide and navigate and make sure the organization didn't lose its moral compass, that the organization didn't look out for all of its stakeholders. And I attribute much of that to a lack of recognition that the organization is nothing more than a collection of people choosing to show up every day and do their jobs as conscious individuals, and the lack of conscious leadership helping to guide and influence and shape the decisions and the activities and the actions that the people in those organizations are taking. So for most of us, when we think about organizations and brands, and there's so much emphasis in the world today on brands, and who are the most valuable brands in the marketplace. There's a reason why there's so much emphasis on that, because that brand actually has value, and Wall Street will increase the value of a company because of the value of the brand. Unfortunately, that has spilled over into our psyches, our mindset about how we see a company, how we see a brand, and we see these organizations as these tremendous monoliths without recognizing they're nothing more than a collection of people showing up every day to do their jobs. So as part of my academic training in organization dynamics, and having grown up in nature on a family farm, and appreciating and understanding nature and systems as nature teaches us about systems and systems thinking, we have much to learn from nature around organization design and around organization dynamics. So when we look at nature, there's a whole design science that has come out of the study of nature, biomimicry. And with biomimicry, we have an opportunity to look at nature, look at design, whether it's around fashion or organization structure or building IT networks or other things. Nature can give us the opportunity to really understand and learn about how systems can work, how design can work. And we can use the mycelium, for example, in nature. So in a forest, the mushrooms called mycelium that are in the soil, in the earth, are essentially an internet of things for trees. And trees use the mycelium to communicate with each other, to let the forest know what's happening. If there's logging going on in a forest, the trees will use the mycelium, that neural network, that internet, to send information and to communicate among the trees, among the forest, to alert the trees in the forest to alert what's happening. We can learn from nature when we think about our organizations, the workplaces that we're creating, the opportunities for human interaction and communication, and how to effectively be with each other. So when we look at the forest and the communication that's happening between the trees, we've forgotten as a species that we have that same network inside of us. We've got an energetic body that's very much connected to our physical body, so that when we're walking into a room, our body is already telling us what's happening in that room because it's picking up energetically what's happening with the other people in the room. When we're physically in the room, yes, we're noticing, hopefully, if we're conscious, about the human interaction, the body language that we're meant to be paying attention to. But our body is a receiver, and it's constantly picking up information. We have the ability, if we pay attention, if we're conscious, if we're aware, to energetically be picking up the signals that are around us. We know scientifically that the human body gets hit with 12 million pieces of information per second. A small fraction, about 4,000, actually go to the human brain. Most of those get processed by the amygdala, the reptilian brain that wants to put us in fight, flight, or freeze mode. We have the ability to use our prefrontal cortex with those few messages, those few bits of information, to process and to pay attention and to be aware of what's happening around us. And as leaders, as individuals, we have the opportunity to use this amazing thing we call a body, not just our physical body, but our spiritual body, our emotional, psychological body, our energetic body, our social body, to be picking up on all of those cues and to help us remain in a conscious state, to be effective in how we're showing up, to being aware, and to be very intentional about our interactions with those around us.